have to fear is
In war, there is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we burn, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
Thomas Jefferson said, "The Constitution of most of our states and of the United States assert that all power is inherent in the people, that they may exercise it by themselves, that it is their right and duty to be at all times armed, that they are entitled to freedom of person, freedom of religion, freedom of property, and freedom of press."
Welcome to WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green. It's Foundations of Freedom Thursday, that day out of the week that we really focus in on the foundations of America, the Constitution, the Declaration, the principles that made our nation great in the first place. David, it's a chance to dive in a little bit deeper. We've been doing it for about a year, and I mean, people are really responding. They're sending in great questions. They're talking about how much they're learning about the Constitution, and it's allowing them to do a better job of holding our public servants accountable because they actually know the rules by which this thing should be played.
Well, you know, we get some great emails from people responding back on what they've learned, but I've had a blast in the last several months speaking everywhere like you speak, and I keep bumping into people who say, man, I love those Foundation of Freedom Thursdays. That is so good. And they talk about which programs they like the most and what they've learned. And so it really is fun to see the energy and enthusiasm. And by the way, if you got questions, send them in. We're happy to address them and go through it because it really is. It's like everybody kind of sitting around a coffee table or sitting in a restaurant somewhere around a table and just kind of talking this stuff out. And it's a lot of fun to do. And it's just really fun to see the energy that is there, to see principles from the Constitution applied to things going on today.
If you want to send a question in, send it to radio@wallbuilders.com. That's radio@wallbuilders.com. We've got several we're going to try to get to today. The first one comes from David Ivasic from Virginia. And David, his question is simple. What can we do to get our government back? We vote for candidates that promise to make change, but once elected, they do the same as the incumbent. We need to remind these politicians that they work for us, and we are their bosses. Enough with them voting for their own raises and benefits. What can we do?
Well, two things right off the bat. One, and I understand exactly what David's saying, and he's right. We do vote for candidates that promise to make change, but they don't make the change. They turn out to be the same as the incumbent. Part of that is the problem of voters. I love what James A. Garfield said way back in 1876 on the centennial of the Declaration of Independence. He said, now, more than ever before, the people are responsible for the character of their Congress. If that body be ignorant, reckless, and corrupt, it's because the people tolerate ignorance, recklessness, and corruption. If it be intelligent, brave, and pure, it's because the people demand these high qualities to represent them in the national legislature. So while David may have voted for someone who was going to make change, that doesn't mean that the other voters who voted for that candidate did so. And so that's one of the problems we have is we are abysmal in voting right now. Most congressional elections have only 1 out of 4 American adults voting, which means to have a majority, all it takes is 1 out of 8 American adults are electing the congressman that serve us in Congress. 7 out of 8 are not voting for the person that is currently sitting in that seat in Congress. And as long as we're content with that number, and I'm going to a New England state, and in that state I'm speaking to some very large churches, and I just found out in one of those churches, it's a very on fire church, but nearly 80% of the members of that church are not even registered to vote in that church.
Wow, 80%.
Nearly 80% not registered to vote. And so that means 20% are registered to vote, and what we find out is that in congressional elections like this, only 1 out of 4 registered folks vote, or 1 out of 3 registered folks vote. So we're probably talking only about 7% of that church votes. So that's part of the problem we have is people who are frustrated with it. They stay frustrated with it. They yell about it, but they're not doing much with it. So we need to be at the point where we have much higher voter turnout than we did. Texas, we had our primary like other states had. Texas, we have 13 million voters, and we had a mere 1.3 million that voted. So you're talking about 10% of people is all that voted in this election that we had. And that's part of the problem. So that's one thing. The other thing that I would point to that's significant was given by John Francis Mercer, because David has made the assumption here that we want our government back and we want the Constitution in place. We want guys in office who will do the right thing and follow the Constitution. Constitution is really clear on all this stuff. You know, there's a great lesson that was offered back when they were writing the Constitution. 55 delegates gathered to write that Constitution. 39 eventually signed it. And one of those delegates was a guy named John Francis Mercer. And as they were working on and writing the Constitution, he kind of dropped a bombshell in the middle of them. It's a great thing that he said. Let me just read the quote that and if you can imagine, here they are working on the Constitution, and he drops this bombshell in the middle of them. And this is what John Francis Mercer said. He said, "It is a great mistake to suppose that the paper we're to propose will govern the United States." And get this. He says, guys, if you think the Constitution governs America, he says, you're nuts. Oh, wait a minute. Then why are we writing this? Why are we all gathered here? Why are we in this hot time in Philadelphia, in Independence Hall? Why have we been bickering and fighting for 5 weeks? Now we're finally getting down to it, and it's not going to govern America? Then what are we doing here? But listen, he says, it's a great mistake to suppose the paper would propose will govern the United States. He said, it's the men that the paper will bring into the government in the interest those people have in maintaining it that will govern the people. He said the paper will only mark out the mode and the form, but men are the substance, and men must do the business. In other words, we're writing the Constitution, but all that's going to do is show you how to elect people to office. If you don't get the right kind of people in office, they will not follow the Constitution. They will not listen to it. They will not heed it. The Constitution doesn't govern America. It's the people that we elect to office under the Constitution. And that's the other thing, is we think when we send these guys to Congress that they're going to do the right thing, and that's not necessarily true. You got to elect people to office that will do the right thing, which means you have to put a lot of focus on the people you elect. You have to ask them hard questions. You need to go to the town halls. You need to go to the candidate forums. You need to set up a candidate forum yourself, or you and 40 of your neighbors or whatever. Bring them in and ask them hard questions. And if you don't get those answers, and by the way, I will say that in the primary elections we just had in Texas, one of the judges who was on our courts, we vote for judges in Texas, one of the judges who was on our court, everybody was for that judge, had an incumbent judge, has been a record, had done a really good job of decisions. But in the questionnaire that was put out by one of the groups, they said, what do you think about a living constitution? And this judge says, I support a living constitution. Now, wait a minute. You're not supposed to believe that if you're a judge. You're supposed to go by the law, the way it's written, not involve it. And so that judge lost the spot simply because we found out that one piece of information. Voters turned against that judge, said, you've been incumbent, you've done all right up to now, but that's not the philosophy we want going forward. And that's what we're going to have to do to get the kind of people in office that we want in office.
Got to take a quick break, but let's think about it while we're on break, folks. Are we voting? Are our friends and family and folks in our church voting? We've got to turn out the vote. We've got to make educated choices about who's in office, and then we got to hold them accountable. But it's not enough for us just to complain. We got to make sure that we're doing our part ahead of time. Quick break. We'll be right back on WallBuilders Live.
John Adams said, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other.
Hey friends, this is Rick Green, and I want to share with you a phenomenal opportunity for your family. David Barton and I both have family members experiencing this right now. It's called College Plus, and it is the best program out there for saving your family a tremendous amount of money on college education for your children, but more importantly, years of their life, and getting them in touch with their purpose, their greatest calling that God has on their life right now. And this is not some mail-order college degree, folks. I'm talking about getting your degree from places like Liberty University or Concordia University or Bryan College, great colleges and universities, and other ones as well. My son Trey's doing it right now at only 16 years old. He's already a sophomore in college. It's been a phenomenal experience for our family. No age requirements, folks. You can do College Plus as well, regardless of your age. You got to check it out right now at wallbuilderslive.com.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Thomas Jefferson said, the constitutions of most of our states and of the United States assert that all power is inherent in the people, that they may exercise it by themselves, that is their right and duty, to be at all times armed, and that they are entitled to freedom of person, freedom of religion, freedom of property, and freedom of press.
Well, there you go, right from Thomas Jefferson. It reflects exactly what you said in the first segment, David, from John Francis Mercer. The people are the ones responsible, so if we don't pay attention to who we're electing, the Constitution itself is just going to be shredded. It's going to be governed around. They're going to ignore it. So we've really got to make sure that the people we put in office will uphold it. And to do that, we got to pay attention to who's running. We got to show up to vote.
We do. And one of the things I would point to that also is another area we need to get into. And by the way, let me point out, one of the things we've talked about on occasion in this program over the years is that the way that a person votes on the life issue is a 90% indicator of how they're going to vote on every other issue. And so go back to what Sam Adams and James Wilson and John Witherspoon and John Quincy Adams and others said about the right to life, and it did include the abortion issue. They dealt with that issue back then. But they said the first of all the inalienable rights is the right to life. And if you don't get the first one right, you don't get the second, third, fourth, fifth right. I mean, if you're on the road going somewhere and you take a wrong turn early on, you'll stay off the course all the rest of the way unless you can make a sharp turn to get back on the road. And that's the way the right to life is. So if you know where a person is on right to life, I can tell you how, if I know where they're on right to life, I'll tell you how they voted on a stimulus bill. I'll tell you how they voted on TARP. I'll tell you what they did on the Small Arms Treaty, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. I'll tell you how they voted on so many issues just by knowing where they're on life. And voting records confirm that and illustrate that. But you'll also find that how you are on life affects where you are economically. And we're able to take voting guides from economic groups like Americans for Tax Reform or National Taxpayers Union or Freedom Works or any other, and you take those guys really good on economics, the 100%ers. If you bump it up against the National Right to Life voting guide, you'll find that it's a 1-to-1 correlation. If you're 100% right to life, you're 100% on the economic issues generally. If you're 0% right to life, you're generally 0% on the economic issues. Very little deviation from that. Our 435 members of Congress, probably by 95 or 97% correlation, it's almost 1-to-1. Very rare are the times when someone is pro-life and doesn't vote good economically. So having said that, when you look at Texas, Texas is hands down the most pro-life state in the United States. We passed more pro-life laws than anybody else. We're doing a great job. Guess what? Our economy is also prospering. In the last 3 years, 40% of all the jobs created in the United States have been created in this one state of Texas. So when you get people that are pro-life, they do good things economically. Let's go to Washington, D.C. The president has advanced 271 abortion measures. Tell me how the economics is doing for the nation right now. The debt is continuing to grow. The spending is continuing to soar. Employment continues to be in the wrong direction. It's all wrong. So having said that, in Texas, where we're very pro-life, we have several pro-life groups here. They're very sophisticated, and they are now to the point where they use technology at a wonderful rate. I got probably 50 emails this year that said, hey, your representative is Representative so-and-so. He's in a committee hearing right now, and at 2:30, they're going to vote on Amendment 1436 on House Bill 723, and it deals with this aspect of abortion. Call your representative right now and tell them to vote no on the amendment to this bill. And they give me all the information. So I can just call and say, hey, I need you to vote this way. And it's really cool, and it has huge impact. Except, I bet I got 50 of those emails this year saying, hey, call now because this vote's up. And you know what? As pro-life as I am, I never made one single phone call to my rep at all this year. And it's not because I'm not concerned about life. I am. It's because I'm the guy who recruited that rep to run for office. I know why I recruited him, and pro-life was the big issue I recruited him on. And that's why he got elected, was to defend life and economics. And so the axiom I've always developed is you want to elect leaders that you don't have to lobby. If I have to call my lobby and say, if I have to call my congressman and lobby him not to vote for a pay raise for himself, I've already lost the battle. I should have elected somebody who knew not to give himself a pay raise. If I have to call my congressman and say, hey, I want you to defend marriage as a man and a woman, I've already lost the battle. I should have elected somebody who had that belief. If I have to call my congressman and say, don't vote for an increase in the debt ceiling, I've already lost the battle. So sometimes that means going and recruiting those people to office, which is what I've done for years. I go find the people with those values that I know the community wants. We recruit them, we run them, and guess what? When they get there, 95% of the time, they don't disappoint you. So sometimes you have to not just take who shows up, you have to go out and actively recruit someone to be on the ballot. And if you can do that, then you can solve the problem that Dave is talking about. So, number one, the Constitution is not what governs the people in office. Number two, if we don't vote for it, we don't have an impact. But number three, sometimes you need to recruit the people and get them elected so that they already have the right values when they get there.
Got to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll get some more of your questions here on Foundations of Freedom Thursday on WallBuilders Live.
Thomas Jefferson said, "In questions of power, then let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution."
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. The key to a self-governing nation is self-governing people, and the key to personal self-government is to live by the standards in God's Word. If someone cannot control himself by those standards, then our Constitution certainly will be unable to restrain him. Understanding this, John Adams declared, "We have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion." Greed, ambition, revenge, or seduction would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. John Adams believed that successful government rested not upon our great Constitution, but rather upon moral and religious people.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
President Calvin Coolidge said, "The more I study the Constitution, the more I realize that no other document devised by the hand of man has brought so much progress and happiness to humanity. To live under the American Constitution is the greatest political privilege that was ever accorded to the human race."
Welcome back to WallBuilders Live, Foundations of Freedom Thursday. That means we're talking about some foundational principles that made America great, often going back to the Constitution and the Declaration specifically, sometimes applying the founders' view to issues maybe that they didn't face quite as much back then, but we face today. However, I think today's issue they did have to deal with. It wasn't maybe as hot a topic as it is today. But Dave, we got a question from Adam that he emailed in, wanting to know the founders' view of immigration and our borders. For example, he said, open borders, like some libertarians want today. Is that what the founders would have wanted? And he also asked if the founders had a criteria for who should or should not come into the country.
Well, the answer is they had open borders of sorts. One of the grievances you'll find in the Declaration of Independence that they were upset about King George was he was stopping immigration coming into America. Now, the reason that's significant is America had standards of who's coming here, and it was really freedom-loving people who are coming to contribute. And so what's happened is King George III is stopping those freedom-loving people. He was, as he tried to do with Georgia, stacking it up with criminals and with other folks. And so the immigration was closed, and all across Europe, as you had people who were persecuted, they came here for freedom and liberty. And so they came as contributors. And once they got here, there were some very clear laws that were to be followed. It's amazing how close America is actually in its history to what happened back in Israel. A lot of people in the social justice movement today say, hey, Leviticus says, be careful how you treat the strangers and sojourners among you, and it talks about Israel. Yeah, but Israel also required those strangers and sojourners to live by the laws of the land. And so if you moved into Israel, you had to live by the laws of the land. Now, you didn't have to become a Jew, but you did have to live by the laws of the land. So the founding fathers were that way. You had all the laws that were passed in the states. And the significant difference with the founding fathers and where we are now is that they believed immigration was a state issue, not a federal issue. Thomas Jefferson, as President of the United States, said that really what the federal government was to do was to make sure that those who came to America's shores were healthy. No tuberculosis, no smallpox, no whatever. But after they get here, they don't live in the United States of America. They live in a state somewhere. They're going to be in one of the states. And so states are the ones who passed the immigration laws, and that was a state issue, literally. The borders were the federal issue, but living as an immigrant inside the United States, that was a state issue until really about the 20th century. It becomes an issue late 1800s, early 20th century. So at the time of the founders, open borders of sorts. You got to live by the laws of the land. You got to be a contributor. I mean, they didn't do welfare back then. They did workfare. So we're not bringing people in who are living off the system, because you'll starve to death if that's going to happen.
And didn't they also desperately need to populate? I mean, didn't they need people here? They needed that growth.
Well, they needed that. I mean, they were getting that growth. I mean, people like President Tyler had 15 kids.
But I mean, more people migrating in.
Well, they wanted more people to migrate in, but they were open to freedom-loving people.
Yeah.
And what they did, America was an asylum for persecuted folks. Persecuted Jews came here when they were persecuted in Portugal. persecuted Anabaptists came here, persecuted Huguenots from France, persecuted Catholics came here from England, persecuted Quakers. I mean, we're an asylum for freedom. You want to come here and practice your freedom? This is the place to be, because you will cherish that freedom when you get here. And so they came in as hardworking contributors, and that was the other requirement. By the way, people object to the fact that the Founding Fathers said you had to be a landowner to vote. Yeah, that's right, but they made land available for a penny an acre. If you're not buying land, it's because you're a lazy bum, and you shouldn't be voting what other people should do with their land if you don't own land of your own. I think that's one of the problems Texas now has, is we got only 47% of our folks in the state that own property, but everybody votes and we live off property taxes. So you actually have more people who don't own property telling the people with property that you got to carry us too. And that's what the founders wanted to avoid, was that kind of situation. So it was open borders of sorts, but there were the laws of the land and contributions and freedom-loving people, and that's what they looked for. And those that didn't like that were very uncomfortable here and went back to the Europe. And a lot of people did. A lot of British folks who came here, very uncomfortable with the freedom, very uncomfortable with local governance. They went back. They couldn't live that way. And so that's really where the founders came down on this, was it's a state issue, and states set the laws. And if you could meet the standards of that state, you're welcome to live in that state. If not, you can't live in that state. You got to go somewhere else. And if you couldn't meet the standards of any of the 50 states, you've got no place to live. You'll have to go back to Europe. And that happened from time to time.
Well, that brings us to the third part of Adam's question, which we'll get to when we come back from the break. And that's the question of whether or not a wall, and in this case, I'm assuming he's referring to a southern wall for the United States, but maybe he's talking about both. But either way, would that be something that the Founding Fathers would have supported? Stay with us right here on WallBuilders Live.
Abraham Lincoln said, "We the people are the rightful masters of both Congress and the courts, not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow the men who pervert the Constitution."
Hey, this is Tim Barton with WallBuilders. And as you've had the opportunity to listen to WallBuilders Live, you've probably heard the wealth of information about our nation, about our spiritual heritage, about the religious liberties, about all the things that makes America exceptional. And you might be thinking, as incredible as this information is, I wish there was a way that I could get one of the WallBuilders guys to come to my area and share with my group, whether it be a church, whether it be a Christian school or public school or some political event or activity. If you're interested in having a WallBuilder speaker come to your area, you can get on our website at www.wallbuilders.com, and there's a tab for scheduling. And if you'll click on that tab, you'll notice there's a list of information from speakers' bios to events that are already going on, and there's a section where you can request an event to bring this information about who we are, where we came from, our religious liberties and freedoms. Go to the WallBuilders website and bring a speaker to your area.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
George Washington. The Constitution approaches nearer to perfection than any other government hitherto instituted among men.
Welcome back to WallBuilders Live. Thanks for staying with us. It's Foundations of Freedom Thursday. And David, one of our questions for today has had to do with immigration and the borders. We talked a little bit about open borders and the founders' view on that. And then also the final part of the question was, what about a wall?
Well, the founders were border conscious. I mean, you got to remember that was very visibly displayed in the states as we became a United States. I mean, states even had border wars with one another. They were very zealous of their borders, very guarded their borders. You'd even have border crossings and border guards between states at times because they controlled what went into their state. So they were very conscious of borders. Now, having said that, we have not done a good job of being conscious of our borders. I mean, we've just turned our head. We've known where all sorts of stuff was going on and just told people not to look at it. We gave our border agents no bullets. You can have a gun, but you can't have bullets. So we're just not very serious about our borders and have not been. I will say in Texas, we finally got serious about our borders because maybe people heard or didn't hear all the deaths that were happening along the border in Texas, gang wars and cartels and people coming across. I think along the Texas border, there were about 3,500 deaths, primarily on the Mexican side, also on the Texas side. Laredo, we lost 3 or 4 sheriffs in a row where they'd come across and gun them down in the United States. So Governor Perry, he went out and got these jet boats and put these jet boats and mounted 50 caliber machine guns on them. They cruise up and down the river and Lake Amistad there, the friendship lake between us and Mexico. And guess what? We just haven't had those shootings anymore. We got border conscious, and this has gone through the floor. Well, now they're doing kidnappings if you go into Mexico, but the border shootings, it's gone down because at least Texas got serious about its borders. So would they support a wall? Well, you know, Governor Perry got in a lot of trouble when he ran for president a couple of years ago because he said, well, they asked him that question. He said, yeah, in parts, you know, you do selective, and people went through the roof. Oh, you need a wall and all of it. Now, if you live in Texas, you know that there are places in Texas with 1,100-foot high sheer cliffs. I mean, you cannot scale that wall with mountain climbing equipment. And it was ridiculous to put a wall up along the Santa Elena Canyon and other places like that. And that's what he meant, but people didn't understand that. So would they support a wall? They would think it's ridiculous to have to build a wall if you just simply enforce what's there. We haven't needed to build a wall in Texas. We just put some patrol boats out going up and down the waters and mounted those 50 caliber machine guns. And guess what? We've kind of solved the problem here along the Texas border. So it's really enforcement rather than walls.
All right, good question from Adam. Thank you for sending it in. And folks, if you'd like to get a question answered on Foundations of Freedom Thursday, please send your question to radio@wallbuilders.com. Radio@wallbuilders.com. We appreciate you listening today to Foundations of Freedom Thursday here on WallBuilders Live.
Thomas Jefferson said, "In questions of power, then let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down for mischief by the chains of the Constitution."
We stand under